Hello, Mrs. Polachek here. If you don't know who I am, I'm a teacher at Hinsdale South High School, and I've also graded the AP exams multiple times, and I am making this video to help you prepare for writing a free response on the upcoming AP exam. So a couple of things about traditional free response rules. So we know that actually, we don't know a lot at this point, but we do know there's going to be some sort of writing on this year's AP exam, and it's most likely going to mirror what a traditional free response is. So what you see here are my traditional free response rules that will be applied, I believe, to the 2020, again, AP exam. So the traditional free response is about 7 to 8 points per free response, and usually there's two. Again, we don't know what's going to be coming up. We'll find out on April 3rd. But again, this is going to be the traditional rules. No introduction, conclusion, or thesis needed. No flow is necessary, no transitions. Don't waste your time writing. And also, AP graders don't want to read an introduction. So please, please, please leave it off. Please follow the SOTA method. This helps with clarifying your answer as well as helps the reader. So again, this is going to be something that is going to help with, again, the writing. So SOTA stands for space, order, define, and apply. And the most important one is apply. You will not get any points unless you apply your answer back to the prompt. You need to write in complete sentences. You can use graphs to help explain your answers, but they must be explained in words unless it asks you to specifically draw something and label it. Grammar doesn't count against you. Spelling doesn't count against you. But again, it needs to be phonetically close to what the word is so that we can sound it out. Your answer for each concept should be approximately 2 to 4 sentences. Again, this is approximately, it depends on what the prompt is. I give a general guideline because, again, kids like to usually know how long it should be. If you have a definition and an application, it should be about 2 sentences. Again, you don't want to write a ton because then you run the risk of contradicting yourself and losing the point. But at the same time, you want to write enough that you know that the reader knows what you're talking about. Start on the parts of the question you know first and make sure you leave a space so that you can go back and answer the first part of the question if you have time. And then if you absolutely don't know an answer, skip the term. However, if it is appropriate to make an effort to guess if you are somewhat familiar with the concept. Now, don't ramble, don't waste our time. The worst experience as an AP grader is reading 4 pages that earns a 0, and it's so depressing. Please help us out, save our time, save your time. Take a guess if you are somewhat familiar, but again, don't guess if you don't know. So here's the process of writing a free response. Read the question once, take a deep breath, you know more than you think. And then I talk about reread the question and underline, annotate. This is important, an important stuff because a lot of times people miss those key words. I do encourage you to reread the question and annotate. Again, make sure you define and always connect to the prompt. If it mentions a person's name, make sure you mention that person's name. If it talks about an event happening, talk about that event happening. Make sure you use the words from the prompt in your answer. That is the key thing in order for you to be awarded points. Always make it clear what term you're answering and underline the term. I will highlight that below. This is easier for the AP grader who is grading your exam to go back and read, especially if you're handwriting the exams, but this year it looks like you are possibly going to be typing them. Again, we'll have to see how that works out. Remember SOTA, write an answer and stick with it. Again, don't write more than needed because it can contradict your answer. Reread the question or your answer and make sure that you've fully answered it. And then take a deep breath and press submit. Okay. You do know more than you think. All right. And I know that a lot of times there's panic when you are going to be seeing a question. You open up the test booklet. You're like, oh my goodness, what's this? All right. So here's a 2003 AP Psychology free response question. And I usually do this as practice at the beginning of the year when I'm talking about stats with my students. So I'm going to do part A with you and kind of highlight how the answer should be written, again, as a model. I do predict that your test is going to have some sort of statistics, research methods question on it. Be prepared for graphs, and I will make a video that highlights the differences between graphs. I do suggest that you'll either have to read a graph and then answer questions about it, or you're going to have to draw a graph and label it, or possibly both. So this is the 2003 AP Psychology Free Response question. And again, this is a lot of people freaked out about this question. They're like, oh my goodness, it's all about stats. But if you pick it apart, usually in a question, there's going to be several easy points that are kind of give me points. There's going to be medium points that you have a good chance at answering. And then there's going to be hard points that not a lot of people around the country are going to answer. In general, I tell students if you can get 2 to 3 points on a 7 point free response, that's the average. 2 to 3 points is the average. When I was grading 2 years ago, I took last year off, but 2 years ago, the average for one of the free responses was like 3.1, and that was a high average. The average for the other one was like a 2.67. So again, if you can get 2 to 3 points, or heck, get all of them, that would be great. But don't feel like you have to get all the points. You want to try to get as many as you can, but again, don't stress out and feel like you have to get all of them. So in this prompt right here, again, it's talking about statistics. In the first part, part A, that first part you don't have to do anything with, but it does talk about intelligence testing. You don't really need to know about intelligence testing until the second part of the question, part B. And so usually I just have kids answer the first part when we're talking about stats. And then I will go over the answers to part B. So if you would like to pause right now, the video, what you can do is pause, and I want you to try to write out the answers. And then you can press play, and you can then see what my answers are. So I want you to practice writing it out like you would or typing it out on an AP exam. And then we're going to press play, and then you can, again, see the answers. Okay, so for the answers, here's my sample answer that I typed out. Obviously, this is not the answer key from the College Board, but this is what I typed that would score. So it says the mean is the average of a set of scores. You can find the mean by adding all the scores together and dividing by the total number of scores. You could also give an example of how, with specific numbers, you could do that, but not necessarily required. 2. The median is the middle number in a set of scores. You can find the median for an even amount by putting a set of scores in order from the least to greatest and count to the middle. You could also, again, give me an example with real numbers. Again, for both of these are the easy points. You want to get the easy points. If you know the definitions for these, technically you got the points. The mode is the most frequent number. And again, I gave an example. So you don't necessarily have to do that. But again, the more examples you can give, that's going to help clarify to the reader that you know the answer. Next, the question talks about a skewed distribution. So it says an extremely high or low outlier causes a skewed distribution. For example, and then I give a set of scores, your 1 would be the outlier because it's super low. You could also talk about a graph is lopsided or has a tail due to the outlier. You could give an example of a picture here, but you'd have to still explain it in words. So again, you could draw a picture to help the reader clarify what you're understanding, but again, a picture alone is not going to give you the point here. So you need to be able to explain it in words. Next, in a normal distribution, the measures of central tendency all fall in the middle of the graph. You could, again, draw a picture here and show where they fall, but again, you have to explain it in words. Next, in a positively skewed distribution, the mean would be pulled towards the tail or outlier. The mode would be at the highest point. Again, it's just asking you to describe what a positively skewed distribution is. Now note, if you look up and it says here, the extremely high or low outlier, okay? And then this point here, you have to be very careful about not answering them the same way. I have to be able to see the difference between you explaining a skewed distribution, just in general, what causes it, and a positively skewed distribution. Again, I need to be able to see the difference there in order for you to get both points. That is, again, when I talked about double dipping in my directions, that's what I'm referring to. Next, the score for an IQ test would range, the score for an IQ test would range from 55 to 145. You can calculate this number by adding 15 and subtracting 15. So for each standard deviation. So here it's talking about how would I actually get the standard deviation. Note that for IQ, the standard deviation is always going to be 15. It's never going to change. It's just asking for you to figure out how could you find within the first standard deviation or second standard deviation, how could you find the IQ scores? Again, I give an example. I highly suggest giving examples. Last part. Yes, you can have a higher score of 115 in the group of scores that has averaged of 100. There are scores above and below the average. Again, you could list out numbers here and tell me how to calculate it, but they just really want you to acknowledge that there are scores higher than and lower than the mean. So again, this is just the part A section. You would still have to answer part B, and I don't have that written, but if let me scroll back up here and I'll just answer them verbally right now since they're not typed. So apply knowledge of psychological research in answering the following questions about intelligence scores. So explain why norms for standard intelligence tests are periodically updated. The reason why they're updated is due to the Flynn effect, is that we are naturally getting smarter over time due to better education, better nutrition, technology, better educations, if I said that already. And that means that if we were used to use the same standards over a period of time, what would happen is people would have a abnormally high intelligence. So the second part, describe how to determine whether an intelligence test is biased, or describe how to determine whether an intelligence test is biased. What it's looking for here is for you to acknowledge things like wording bias and um, things like culture that could impact it, gender. So you have to pick one of those things and then connect it to how that could possibly bias an intelligence test score. So this one is actually the last part would be an example that there's going to be more of an open-ended thing that you could list, and you want to make sure you explain it well for the reader to understand. Okay, so hopefully this helped you with free response writing. I will make more of these videos in the future, and I wish you the best of luck on the upcoming AP exam.